Well, we'll go ahead and start because we have a plethora of materials and some terrific readers ahead. My name's Bette Ammon. I'm the director of Missoula Public Library. I'm so pleased. Oh, nice applause back there. I'm so pleased you're here. I know that those of you who've been attending other Book Fest activities are mightily impressed and pleased with what's available in Missoula during this time of the year. And the library is always so happy to be a part of this. And this program in particular speaks fondly to the heart of librarians. Every year, people across the country challenge books. Every year in the United States, there are a variety of books that are challenged for a variety of reasons. And while we're not celebrating the challenging of books, we're celebrating the freedom to read and calling your attention to books that have been challenged for a variety of reasons. And I have to say that many times people challenge books, walk into libraries, to school libraries, and say, I don't want this book on your shelf, for oftentimes really sincere, concerned reasons. They want to protect children, they want to protect everybody's child, they want to protect all of you from a thought, a word, an idea that they deem might be dangerous or off-putting to you. But what that means is if books are removed from shelves, that always and forever, that material is gone from you or anyone else who wants to read that book. And that means you'll never get to read that book, think about that book, discuss that book. You'll never have the freedom to read, or you'll never have what we call in the library profession intellectual freedom. And we protect that every day in your library and in every library across the country. And so during Bad Books Week, we celebrate the freedom to read, and we call your attention to books that might have been removed were it not for brave librarians and brave people who are here today to share some excerpts with you. We have many wonderful readers, and I'm going to switch names on you just because we've had a few people who had to change their minds at the last second. What you'll be hearing today are excerpts from books that have been challenged for one reason or another. And after the reader completes their reading, I'll read to you what the challenges were all about, where the book was challenged and why, and what ultimately happened to that material. And I'm getting on that material from a book called Banned Books. And this is put out every year by the American Library Association. It's full of all kinds of reasons that books were challenged across the country for many, many years. And it just calls our attention to this issue and makes us ever vigilant about it. Our first readers were going to be Bridget and Nat Wilson. Bridget is on the Friends of the Library Board. She was going to read this book to her 3-year-old son, Nat. She reads this book to Nat a lot, but they, I think, are en route from Coeur d'Alene. So we have a fellow librarian stepping in and helping out, and she is Gloria Curdy. Gloria is the coordinator of the school libraries for Missoula County Public Schools, and she knows a good book when she sees one. Gloria, you want to come up and read In the Night Kitchen by Maurice Sendak?
Actually, I've never met a book I didn't like. In the Night Kitchen by Maurice Sendak, Caldecott Honor Book. In the Night Kitchen. Did you ever hear of Mickey? How he heard a racket in the night, thump, 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 and shouted, "Quiet down there!" and fell through the dark out of his clothes, past the moon, past his mama, past his papa, sleeping in the night, into the light of the night kitchen. Jolly, jolly chefs they are. Where the bakers who bake till the dawn so we can have a cake in the morn, mixed Mickey into the batter, chanting, milk in the batter, stir it, scrape it, make it, bake it. And they put that batter up to bake a delicious Mickey cake. But right in the middle of the steaming and the making and the smelling and the baking, Mickey poked through and said, "I'm not the milk, and the milk's not me. I'm Mickey." So he skipped from the oven into the bread dough, all ready to rise in the night kitchen. He kneaded and punched it and pounded and pulled till it looked okay. Can you see what it is? It's an aeroplane. Then Mickey in dough was just on his way, when the bakers ran up with a majoring cup, howling, "Milk, milk, milk for the morning cake." "What's all the fuss? I'm Mickey the pilot. I get milk the Mickey way." And he grabbed the cup as he flew up and up and up and over the top of the Milky Way in the night kitchen. Mickey the milkman dived down to the bottom, singing, "I'm in the milk and the milk's in me. God bless milk and God bless me." Then he swam to the top, pouring milk from his cup into the batter below. So the bakers, they mixed it and beat it and baked it. Milk in the batter, we bake cake and nothing's the matter. Now Mickey in the night kitchen cried, "Cock-a-doodle-doo," and slid down the slide, yawned, and straight into bed. Cake free and dried. Hum, yum. And that's why, thanks to Mickey, we have cake every morning.
Okay, now you're all shaking your heads and you're wondering what on earth could be wrong with this book. What do you think?
Naked.
In the Night Kitchen, removed from an Illinois school library in 1977 due to nudity for no purpose. Expurgated in Missouri in 1988 by drawing shorts on the nude boy. Expurgated also in Missoula by drawing shorts on the nude boy. We had to remove our copy that had some decorations. Challenged in Illinois in 1988 because of gratuitous nudity. Challenged in Minnesota in 1982. And this book's 30 years old, okay? Because reading the book could lay the foundation for future use of pornography. Challenged at the El Paso, Texas Public Library in 1994 because the little boy pictured did not have any clothes on and it pictured his private area. Years ago, when my daughter, who's 26, was 3, I was taking a children's literature class and we were talking about this book and I showed her this picture and said, "Do you think Mickey is a boy or a girl?" Because he's really never identified his gender as it. And she looked at me with all the despair that a 3-year-old can have, and she said, "He's a boy." And I said, "Well, how can you tell?" And she said, "Because he has that pot on his head." You know, she definitely doesn't have a future in pornography. I don't know what she has a future in. Our next reader will be reading from Ray Bradbury's Fahrenheit 451. The reader is Kate Jackson. Kate's on the Missoula Public Library Board of Trustees. Kate?
Okay, this is probably familiar to a lot of you. This book was originally published in shorter form in 1950 and then came out in wider form in 1953. And the selection I'm going to read to you is a dialogue between Guy Montag, who was a fireman, whose job it was to start fires and to burn books, and a professor who told him of a future in which people could think. So here's the beginning of the dialogue. And the person speaking is the professor, and he's explaining to Guy Montag about why books are important. Number 1, do you know why books such as this are so important? Because they have quality. And what does the word quality mean? To me, it means texture. The book has pores. It has features. This book can go under the microscope. You'd find life under the glass, streaming past in infinite profusion. The more pores, the more truthfully recorded details of life per square inch you can get on a sheet of paper, the more literary you are. That's my definition anyway. Telling detail, fresh detail. The good writers touch life often. The mediocre ones run a quick hand over her. The bad ones rape her and leave her for the flies. So now, do you see why books are hated and feared? They show the pores in the face of life. The comfortable people want only wax-moon faces, poreless, hairless, expressionless. We are living in a time when flowers are trying to live on flowers, instead of growing on good rain and black loam. Even fireworks, for all their prettiness, come from some chemistry of the earth. Yet somehow we think we can grow, feeding on flowers and fireworks without completing the cycle back to reality. Do you know the legend of Hercules and Antinous, the giant wrestler whose strength was incredible, so long as he stood firmly on the earth? But when he was held rootless in midair by Hercules, he perished easily. If there isn't something in that legend for us today, in this city, in our time, then I am completely insane. Well, there we have the first thing I said we need: quality, texture of information. And the second? Leisure. Oh, but we've plenty of off hours. Off hours, yes, but time to think? If you're not driving 100 miles an hour at a clip where you can't think of anything else but the danger, then you're playing some games or sitting in some room where you can't argue with the four-wall television. Why? The television is real. It is immediate. It has dimension. It tells what to think and blasts it in. It must be right. It seems so right. It rushes you on so quickly to its own conclusions your mind hasn't time to protest. What nonsense. Only the family is people. I beg pardon? My wife says books aren't real. Thank God for that. You can shut them, say, hold on a moment. You play God to it. But who has ever torn himself from the claw that encloses you when you drop a seed into a TV parlor? It grows you any shape it wishes. It is an environment as real as the world. It becomes and is the truth. Books can be beaten down with reason, but with all my knowledge and skepticism, I have never been able to argue with a 100-piece symphony orchestra, full color, 3 dimensions, and being in and part of these incredible parlors. As you see, my parlor is nothing but 4 plaster walls. And here, he held out 2 small rubber plugs for my ears when I ride the subway jets. Denim's dentifrice, they toil not, neither do they spin, said Montag, eyes shut. Where do we go from here? Would books help us? Only if the third necessary thing could be given us. Number 1, as I said, quality of information. Number 2, leisure to digest it. And number 3, the right to carry out actions based on what we learn from the interaction of the first 2. And I hardly think a very old man and a fireman turned sour could do much this late in the game.
Well, the temperature that at which books burn is Fahrenheit 451. This is a book that for years and years has exemplified the right to read, freedom to read, the right to preserve books. The words are wonderful. The ideas are profound. This book was expurgated, and expurgated means either the text was altered or crossed out. And this was in California in 1992. Students who were studying this book in school received copies of the book with scores of words, mostly hells and damns, blacked out. The novel's about book burning and censorship. After receiving complaints from parents and being contacted by reporters, school officials said the censored copies would no longer be used. So, a victory for our side in Fahrenheit 451. Our next reader is Shannon McAnally. And the first year, the very first Montana Festival of the Book, we had a Harry Potter Readers Theater, and Shannon was one of the readers in that group and did such a fine job and has been a Harry Potter fan for a really long time. And many of you know that Harry Potter's been any of the Harry Potter series, those have been challenged books, up on the #1 list of challenged books for years and years. Shannon's going to tell you why, or at least read a little bit.
All right, I'm going to read chapter 4 of Harry Potter and the Goblet of Fire, and he's getting ready to go back to Hogwarts for the 4th year. By 12 o'clock the next day, Harry's school trunk was packed with his school things and all his most prized possessions. The invisibility cloak he had inherited from his father, the broomstick he had gotten from Sirius, the enchanted map of Hogwarts he had been given by Fred and George Weasley last year. He had emptied his hiding place under the loose floorboard of all food, double-checked every nook and cranny of his bedroom for forgotten spellbooks or quills, and taken down the chart on the wall counting down the days to September the 1st, on which he liked to cross off the days remaining until his return to Hogwarts. The atmosphere inside number 4, Privet Drive, was extremely tense. The imminent arrival at their house of an assortment of wizards was making the Dursleys uptight and irritable. Uncle Vernon had looked downright alarmed when Harry informed him that the Weasleys would be arriving at 5 o'clock the very next day. "I hope you told them to dress properly, these people," he snarled at once. "I've seen the sort of stuff you lot wear. They'd better have the decency to put on normal clothes, that's all." Harry felt a slight sense of foreboding. He had rarely seen Mr. or Mrs. Weasley wearing anything that the Dursleys would call normal. Their children might don Muggle clothing during the holidays, but Mr. and Mrs. Weasley usually wore long robes in varying states of shabbiness. Harry wasn't bothered about what the neighbors would think, but he was anxious about how rude the Dursleys might be when the Weasleys turned up. Uncle Vernon had put on his best suit. To some people, this might have looked like a gesture of welcome, but Harry knew it was because Uncle Vernon wanted to look impressive and intimidating. Dudley, on the other hand, looked somehow diminished. This was not because the diet was at last taking effect, but due to fright. Dudley had emerged from his last encounter with a fully grown wizard with the curly pig's tail poking out of the seat of his trousers, and Aunt Petunia and Uncle Vernon had to pay for its removal at a private hospital in London. It wasn't altogether surprising, therefore, that Dudley kept running his hand nervously over his backside and walking sideways from room to room so as not to present the same target to the enemy. Lunch was an almost silent meal. Dudley didn't even protest at the food, cottage cheese and grated celery. Aunt Petunia wasn't eating anything at all. Her arms were folded, her lips were pursed, and she seemed to be chewing her tongue as though biting back the furious diatribe she longed to throw at Harry. "They'll be driving, of course," Uncle Vernon barked across the table. Said Harry. He hadn't thought of that. How were the Dursleys going to pick him up? They didn't have a car anymore, and the old Ford Anglia they had once owned was currently running wild in the Forbidden Forest at Hogwarts. But Mr. Weasley had borrowed a Ministry of Magic car last year. Possibly he wouldn't do the same today? "I think so," said Harry. Uncle Vernon snorted into his mustache. Normally, Uncle Vernon would have asked what car Mr. Weasley drove. He tended to judge other men by how big and expensive their cars were, but Harry doubted whether Uncle Vernon would have taken to Mr. Weasley even if he drove a Ferrari. Harry spent most of the afternoon in his bedroom. He couldn't stand watching Aunt Petunia peer out through the net curtains every few seconds, as though there had been a warning about an escaped rhinoceros. Finally, at 4:45, Harry went back downstairs and into the living room. Aunt Petunia was compulsively straightening cushions. Uncle Vernon was pretending to read the paper, but his tiny eyes were not moving, and Harry was sure he was really listening with all his might for the sound of an approaching car. Dudley was crammed into an armchair, his porky hands beneath him, clamped firmly around his bottom. Harry couldn't take the tension. He felt the room and went and sat on the stairs in the hall. His eyes on his watch and his heart pumping fast from excitement and nerves. By 5 o'clock came and went. Uncle Vernon, sweating slightly in his suit, opened the front door, peered up and down the street, and withdrew his head quickly. "They're late," he snarled at Harry. "I know," said Harry. "Maybe, the traffic's bad or something." 5:10, then 5:15. Harry was starting to feel anxious himself now. At 5:30, Uncle Vernon and Aunt Petunia were having a conversation in terse mutters in the living room. No consideration at all. We might have had an engagement. Maybe they think they'll get invited to dinner if they're late. Well, they most certainly won't be, said Uncle Vernon, and Harry heard him stand up and start pacing the living room. They'll take the boy and go. There'll be no hanging around. That's if they're coming at all. Probably mistaken the day. I dare say their kind don't set much store by punctuality. Either that or they'll drive some tin pot car that's broken. Arr! Harry jumped up. From the other side of the living room door came the sounds of the three Dursleys scrambling, panic-stricken across the room. The next moment Dudley came flying into the hall looking terrified. "What happened?" said Harry. "What's the matter?" But Dudley didn't seem able to speak. Hands still clamped over his buttocks, he waddled as fast as he could into the kitchen. Harry hurried into the living room. Loud bangings and scrapings were coming from behind the Dursleys' boarded-up fireplace, which had taken a fake coal fire plug in front of it. "What is it?" gasped Aunt Petunia, who had backed into the wall and was staring, terrified, toward the fire. "What is it, Vernon?" But they were left in doubt barely a second longer. Voices could be heard from inside the blocked fireplace. "Ouch, Fred, no, no. Go back, go back. There's been some kind of mistake. Tell George not to go. Ouch, George, no, there's no room. Go back quietly and tell Ron. Maybe Harry can hear us, Dad. Maybe he'll be able to let us out." There was a loud hammering of fists on the boards behind the electric fire. "Harry, Harry, can you hear us?" The Dursleys rounded on Harry like a pair of angry wolverines. "What is this?" growled Uncle Vernon. "What's going on?" They've tried to get here by flue powder," said Harry, fighting a mad desire to laugh. "They can travel by fire, only you've blocked the fireplace. Hang on." He approached the fireplace and called through the boards. "Mr. Weasley, can you hear me?" The hammering stopped. Somebody inside the chimney piece said, "Shh." "Mr. Weasley, it's Harry. The fireplace has been blocked up. You won't be able to get through here." "Damn," said Mr. Weasley's voice. "What on earth did they want to block up the fireplace for?" "They've got an electric fire," Harry explained. "Really?" said Mr. Weasley's voice excitedly. "Electric, you say? With a plug? Gracious, I must see that. Let's think. Ouch, Ron!" Ron's voice now joined the others. "What are we doing here? Has something gone wrong?" "Oh, no, Ron," came his Fred voice very sarcastically. "No, this is exactly where we wanted to end up." "Yeah, we're having the time of our lives here," said George, whose voice sounded muffled as though he was squashed against the wall. Boys, said Mr. Weasley vaguely. "I'm trying to think what to do. Yes, the only way. Stand back, Harry." Harry retreated to the sofa. Uncle Vernon, however, moved forward. "Wait a moment," he bellowed at the fire. "What exactly are you going to?" Bang. The electric fire shot out across the room as the boarded-up fireplace burst outward, expelling Mr. Weasley, Fred, George, and Ron in a cloud of rubble and loose chippings. Aunt Petunia shrieked and fell backward over the coffee table. Uncle Vernon caught her before she hit the floor and gaped, speechless at the Weasleys, all of whom had bright red hair, including Fred and George, who were identical to the last freckle. "That's better," panted Mr. Weasley, brushing dust from his long green robes and straightening his glasses. "Ah, you must be Harry's aunt and uncle." Tall, thin, and balding, he moved toward Uncle Vernon, his hand outstretched, but Uncle Vernon backed away several paces, dragging Aunt Petunia. Words utterly failed Uncle Vernon. His best suit was covered in white dust, which had settled in his hair and mustache and made him look as though he had just aged 30 years. Yeah, sorry about that," said Mr. Weasley, lowering his hand and looking over his shoulder at the blasted fireplace. "It's all my fault. I just didn't occur to me that we wouldn't be able to get out at the other end. I had your fireplace connected to the flue network, you see, just for an afternoon, you know, so we could get Harry. Muggle fireplaces aren't supposed to be connected, strictly speaking, but I've got a useful contact at the flue regulation panel, and he fixed it for me. I can put it right in a jiffy, though, don't worry. I'll light a fire to send the boys back, and then I can repair your fireplace before I separate." Harry was ready to bet that the Dursleys hadn't understood a single word of this. They were still gaping at Mr. Weasley, thunderstruck. Aunt Petunia staggered upright again and hid behind Uncle Vernon. "Hello, Harry," said Mr. Weasley brightly. "Got your trunk ready?" "It's upstairs," said Harry, grinning back. "We'll get it," said Fred at once, winking at Harry. He and George left the room. They knew where Harry's bedroom was, having once rescued him from it in the dead of the night. Harry suspected that Fred and George were hoping for a glimpse of Dudley. They had heard a lot about him from Harry. "Well," said Mr. Weasley, swinging his arms slightly while he tried to find the words to break the very nasty silence. Very nice place you've got here." As the usual spotless living room was now covered in dust and bits of brick, this remark didn't go down too well with the Dursleys. Uncle Vernon's face purpled once more, and Aunt Petunia started chewing her tongue again. However, they seemed too scared to actually say anything. Mr. Weasley was looking around. He loved everything to do with Muggles. Harry could see him itching to go and examine the television and the radio recorder. "They run off electricity, do they?" he said knowledgeably. "Ah, yes, I can see the plugs. I connect plugs," he added to Uncle Vernon, "and batteries. Got a very large connection of batteries. My wife thinks I'm mad, but there you are." Uncle Vernon clearly thought Mr. Weasley was mad too. He moved ever so slightly to the right, screening Aunt Petunia from view, as though he thought Mr. Weasley might suddenly run at them and attack. Dudley suddenly reappeared in the room. Harry could hear the clunk of his trunk on the stairs and knew that the sounds had scared Dudley out of the kitchen. Dudley edged along the wall, gazing at Mr. Weasley with terrified eyes, and attempted to conceal himself behind his mother and father. Unfortunately, Uncle Vernon's bulk, while sufficient to hide bony Aunt Petunia, was nowhere near enough to conceal Dudley. "Ah, this is your cousin, is it, Harry?" said Mr. Weasley, taking another brave stab at conversation. "Yep," said Harry, "that's Dudley." He and Ron exchanged glances and then quickly looked away from each other. The temptation to burst out laughing was almost overwhelming. Dudley was still clutching his bottom as though afraid it might fall off. Mr. Weasley, however, seemed genuinely concerned at Dudley's peculiar behavior. Indeed, from the tone of his voice when he spoke, Harry was quite sure that Mr. Weasley thought Dudley was mad, as the Dursleys thought, except that Mr. Weasley felt sympathy rather than fear. "Having a good holiday, Dudley?" he said kindly. Dudley whimpered. Harry saw his hands tighten still harder under his massive backside. Fred and George came back into the room carrying Harry's school trunk. They glanced around as they entered and spotted Dudley. Their faces crackled into two identical evil grins. "All right," said Mr. Weasley. "Better get cracking then." He pushed up the sleeves of his robes and took out his wand. Harry saw the Dursleys draw back against the wall as one. "Incendio," said Mr. Weasley, pointing his wand at the hole in the wall behind him. Flames rose at once in the fireplace, cracking merrily as though they had been burning for hours. Mr. Weasley took a small drawstring from his pocket, untied it, and took a pinch of the powder inside and threw it into the flames, which turned emerald green and roared higher than ever. "Off you go then, Fred," said Mr. Weasley. "Come in," said Fred. "Oh no, hang on." A bag of sweets had spilled out of Fred's pocket, and the contents were now rolling in every direction. Big, fat toffees and brightly colored wrappers. Fred scrambled around, cramming them back into his pocket, then gave the Dursleys a cheery wave, stepped forward, and walked right into the fire, saying, "The burrow." Aunt Petunia gave a little, shuddering gasp. There was a whooshing sound, and Fred vanished. "Right then, George," said Mr. Weasley. "You in the trunk." Harry helped George carry the trunk forward into the flames and turn it on to its end so that he could hold it better. Then, with a second whoosh, George had cried, "The burrow," and vanished too. "Ron, you next," said Mr. Weasley. "See you," said Ron brightly to the Dursleys. He grinned broadly at Harry, then stepped into the fire, shouted, "The burrow," and disappeared. Now Harry and Mr. Weasley alone remained. "Well, bye then," said Harry to the Dursleys. They didn't say anything at all. Harry moved toward the fire, but just as he reached the edge of the hearth, Mr. Weasley put out a hand and held him back. He was looking at the Dursleys in amazement. "Harry said goodbye to you," he said. "Didn't you hear him?" "It doesn't matter," Harry muttered to Mr. Weasley. "Honestly, I don't care." Mr. Weasley did not remove his hand from Harry's shoulder. "You aren't going to see your nephew till next summer," he said to Uncle Vernon in mild indignation. "Surely you're going to say goodbye?" Uncle Vernon's face worked furiously. The idea of being taught consideration by a man who had just blasted away half his living room wall seemed to be causing him intense suffering. But Mr. Weasley's wand was still in his hand, and Uncle Vernon's tiny eyes darted to it once before he said very resentfully, "Goodbye then." "See you," said Harry, putting one foot forward into the green flames, which felt pleasantly like warm breath. At that moment, however, a horrible gagging sound erupted behind him, and Aunt Petunia started to scream. Harry wheeled around. Dudley was no longer standing behind his parents. He was kneeling beside the coffee table, and he was gagging and spluttering on a foot-long purple, slimy thing that was protruding from his mouth. One bewildered second later, Harry realized that the foot-long thing was Dudley's tongue, and that a brightly colored toffee wrapper lay on the floor before him. Aunt Petunia hurled herself onto the ground beside Dudley, seized the end of his swollen tongue, and attempted to wrench it out of his mouth. Unsurprisingly, Dudley yelled and spluttered worse than ever, trying to fight her off. Uncle Vernon was bellowing and waving his arms around, and Mr. Weasley had to shout to make himself heard. "Not to worry, I can sort him out," he yelled, advancing on Dudley and his wand outstretched. But Aunt Petunia screamed worse than ever and threw herself on top of Dudley, shielding him from Mr. Weasley. "No, really," said Mr. Weasley desperately. "It's a simple process. It was the toffee. My son Fred, real practical joker. But it's only an engorgement charm. At least I think it is. Please, I can correct it." But far from being reassured, the Dursleys became more panic-stricken. Aunt Petunia was sobbing hysterically, tugging Dudley's tongue as though determined to rip it out. Dudley appeared to be suffocating under the combined pressure of his mother and his tongue, and Uncle Vernon, who had lost control completely, seized a china figure from on top of the sideboard and threw it very hard at Mr. Weasley, who ducked, causing the ornament to shatter in the blasted fireplace. "Now really," said Mr. Weasley angrily, brandishing his wand, "I'm trying to help." Bellowing like a wounded hippo, Uncle Vernon snatched up another ornament. "Harry, go, just go," Mr. Weasley shouted, his wand on Uncle Vernon. "I'll sort this out." Harry didn't want to miss the fun, but Uncle Vernon's second ornament narrowly missed his left ear, and on balance he thought it was best to leave the situation to Mr. Weasley. He stepped into the fire, looking over her shoulder, and he said, "The burrow." His last fleeting glimpse of the living room was of Mr. Weasley blasting a third ornament out of Uncle Vernon's hand with his wand, Aunt Petunia screaming and lying on top of Dudley, and Dudley's tongue lolling around like a great slimy python. But next moment Harry had begun to spin very fast, and the Dursleys' living room was whipped out of sight in a rush of emerald green flames.
Well, parents across the country have complained about Harry Potter and his band of ruffians and all their misdeeds. And understand this, parents really do have a perfect right to teach their family values, and in fact should teach their family values to their children and control what their children read. Unfortunately, what's happened, particularly in the case of Harry Potter, is the move toward protecting everyone's child from reading those books. And I think Shannon's life and my life and many lives would be forever altered had we not met up with that wizard. These novels have been challenged because they characterize authority as stupid and portray good witches and good magic. Challenged but retained in Connecticut schools despite claims the series makes witchcraft and wizardry alluring to children. Challenged in South Carolina in 1999 because the books have a serious tone of death, hate, lack of respect, and sheer evil. The intense storylines, violence, wizardry, and the sucking of animal blood was one of the reasons. Challenged because they promote witchcraft, contain lying and smart aleck retorts to adults, concerns that the books will lead children to hatred and rebellion, complaints about dark themes, dealing with magic and bad experiences. They're scary, violent. Books are telling children over and over again that lying, cheating, and stealing are not only acceptable, but they're cool and cute. The book was burned in New Mexico because the series is a, quote, masterpiece of satanic deception, unquote. Harry Potter. Sex, violence, religion, and politics. Those seem to be the four major areas that garnered the most complaints. This next selection, it's an excerpt from the autobiography of Benjamin Franklin, will be read by Bill Toll, who's the chair of the Missoula Public Library Board of Trustees.
This is from the autobiography of Benjamin Franklin. If you're used to the advice that poor Richard gives, you may find this a little different. This is advice on the choice of a mistress, and it is addressed to my dear friend. He doesn't name the person, but it's from Philadelphia, June 25th, 1745. At that time, Benjamin Franklin was 39 years old. My dear friend, I know of no medicine fit to diminish the violent natural inclinations you mention, and if I did, I think I should not communicate it to you. Marriage is the proper remedy. It is the most natural state of man, and therefore the state in which you are most likely to find solid happiness. Your reasons against entering it at present appear to me not well-founded. The circumstantial advantages you have in view by postponing it are not only uncertain, but they are small in comparison with that of the thing itself, that being married and settled. It is the man and woman united that make the complete human being. Separate, she wants his force of body and strength of reason. He, her softness, sensibility, and acute discernment. Together they are more likely to succeed in the world. A single man has not nearly the value he would have in a state of union. He is an incomplete animal. He resembles the odd half of a pair of scissors. If you get a prudent, healthy wife, your industry and your profession with her good economy will be a fortune sufficient. But if you will not take the counsel and persist in thinking of a commerce with the sex inevitable, then I repeat my former advice that in all your amours you should prefer old women to young ones. You call this a paradox and demand my reasons. They are these. 1, because they have more knowledge of the world and their minds are better stored with observations, their conversation is more improving and more lastingly agreeable. 2, because when women cease to be handsome, they study to be good. To maintain their influence over men, they supply the diminution of beauty by an augmentation of utility. They learn to do 1,000 services, small and great, and are the most tender and useful of friends when you are sick. Thus they continue amiable. And hence there is hardly such a thing to be found as an old woman who is not a good one. Number 3, because there is no hazard of children, which irregularly produced may be attended with much inconvenience. 4, because through more experience they are more prudent and discreet in conducting an intrigue to prevent suspicion. The commerce with them, therefore, is safer with regard to your reputation, and with regard to theirs, if the affair should happen to be known, considerate people might be rather inclined to excuse an old woman who would kindly take care of a young man, form his manners by her good counsels, and prevent his ruining his health and fortune among mercenary prostitutes. Number 5, because in every animal that walks upright, the deficiency of the fluid that fills the muscles appear first in the highest part. The face first grows lank and wrinkled, then the neck, then the breast and arms, the lower parts continuing to the last as plump as ever. So that covering all above with a basket, and regarding only what is below the girdle, it is impossible of 2 women to tell an old one from a young one. And as in the dark all cats are gray, the pleasure of corporal enjoyment with an old woman is at least equal and frequently superior, every knack being by practice capable of improvement. Because the sin is less. The debauching a virgin may be her ruin and make her for life unhappy. 7, because the compunction is less. The having made a young girl miserable may give you frequent bitter reflection, none of which attend the making an old woman happy. 8th and lastly, they are so grateful. Thus, much from my paradox, but still I advise you to marry directly, being sincerely your affectionate friend, Benjamin Franklin.
Well, there's a lot to complain about in that slide. The expurgation of Benjamin Franklin seems to have increased over the years until he became, in the early 20th century, one of the most censored, yet at the same time one of the most widely reprinted writers in American history. And the essay that Bill just read is one that's commonly expurgated. And in fact, I'll have to say, in the autobiography we have, the really old version of autobiography, that essay isn't there. We had to find it online. Thank goodness for libraries. Librarians who know how to find things, right? Our next reader will be reading excerpts from Shel Silverstein's The Light in the Attic. And this reader is somebody's voice whom you'll all recognize. We love her. We love her every Tuesday when she comes and men's books at the library. And you love her too, Marcia Dunn.
This is a poetry book that's full of questionable behavior, and Betty picked these poems. Bad Betty. This first one I should have known about when I was growing up. When we would get together for family reunions, all the women would do the dishes and clean up after dinners, all the aunts and cousins and grandparents. I would hide in the bathroom, and when I figured they were through, I would come out. But this seems like a good idea, too. How not to have to dry the dishes. If you have to dry the dishes, such an awful boring chore, if you have to dry the dishes instead of going to the store, if you have to dry the dishes and you drop one on the floor, maybe they won't ask you to dry the dishes anymore. I thought I was getting away with something till my Aunt Delsina said once when I figured they were through and I came out, "We must be through in here. Marcia's coming out of the bathroom." This is called Messy Room. Whosever room this is should be ashamed. His underwear is hanging on a lamp. His raincoat is there in the overstuffed chair, and the chair is becoming quite mucky and damp. His workbook is wedged in the window. His sweater has been thrown on the floor. His scarf and one ski are beneath the TV, and his pants have been carelessly hung on the door. His books are all jammed in the closet. His vest has been left in the hall. A lizard named Ed is asleep in his bed, and his smelly old sock has been stuck to the wall. Whosever room this is should be ashamed. Donald or Robert or Willie or, huh? You say it's mine? Oh dear, I knew it looked familiar. This is the nail biter. Some people manicure their nails. Some people trim them neatly. Some people keep them filed down. I bite them off completely. Yes, it's a nasty habit, but before you start to scold, remember, I have never, ever scratched a single soul. This is little Abigail and a beautiful pony. There was a girl named Abigail who was taking a drive through the country with her parents when she spied a beautiful sad-eyed gray and white pony. And next to it was a sign that said, "For sale, cheap." "Oh," said Abigail, "may I have that pony, may I please?" And her parents said, "No, you may not." And Abigail said, "But I must have that pony." And her parents said, "Well, you can't have that pony, but you can have a nice butter pecan ice cream cone when we get home." And Abigail said, "I don't want a butter pecan ice cream cone. I want that pony. I must have that pony." And her parents said, "Be quiet and stop nagging. You're not getting that pony." And Abigail began to cry and said, "If I don't get that pony, I'll die." And her parents said, "You won't die. No child ever died yet from not getting a pony." And Abigail felt so bad that when they got home, she went to bed, and she couldn't eat and she couldn't sleep. And her heart was broken, and she did die. All because of a pony that her parents wouldn't buy. This is a good story to read to your folks when they won't buy you something.
A Light in the Attic, challenged in Wisconsin in 1985 because the book encourages children to break dishes so they won't have to dry them. Removed from public libraries in North Dakota in 1986 in anticipation of a parent's complaint. With, complaints have ranged around the suggestive illustrations, glorified Satan, suicide and cannibalism, and the encouragement for children to be disobedient. Poems in the book suggest drug use, the occult, suicide, death, violence, disrespect for truth, disrespect for legitimate authority, rebellion against parents, and because it inspires young people to commit acts of violence. Book promotes behavior abusive to women and children, suicide as a way to manipulate parents, mockery of God, and selfish and disrespectful behavior. Little Abigail and the Beautiful Pony, very vile and contains subliminal or underlying messages and anti-parent materials. And it's morbid, imparts a dreary and negative message. I think that book, that particular book that Marcia was reading from, has checked out over 99 times, and it's probably the 10th edition of that book that this library's had. If you haven't noticed, I've tried to match readers to the age of the material the books were for, although obviously, Bill, you and Ben Franklin are, well, you look 39. That's how old he was when he wrote that. The next selection is from a book called Who Killed Mr. Chippendale by Mel Glenn, and it's a mystery in poems. It's a great collection of narrative poetry that tells a story, and reading will be Owen Javins.
My name's Owen Javins, and I'm going to be reading Who Killed Mr. Chippendale, a Mystery in Poems by Mel Glenn. Robert Chippendale. In the early morning light, Robert Chippendale, English teacher for more than 20 years at Tower High, punches in at 7:04. He will never touch that card again. He is unaware that before this day, February 27th, is over, Tower will be rocked by murder. Spotlighted on the 10 o'clock news and denounced by the general public. Dressed in a blue jogging suit, he carries over his shoulder his old sports jacket and newer slacks, his school clothes in a garment bag, which he hangs in the teacher's locker room. Lightly jogging down the stairs to the back door, he pushes it open to cross the short path to the running track. He lets his mind wander while he stretches, pretending to be somewhere else. The sand dunes of the Cape, the boardwalk of the beach. He glances back at the school, a looming gray citadel with rounding arches and bulky minarets. In a few minutes, the morning quiet will be shattered by the babble of 2,000 students. Not a melting pot, but a multicultural mix, slouching its way toward Tower, but with the customary cynicism of youth. And now the school stands, tall and quiet, amid the working class world of fast food places and auto repair shops. He thinks he hears his name being called from beyond the fence. "Hey, Mr. Chippendale!" A girl's voice floats by. But the sound and the shape of the girl are gone before he can recognize either. He hates his name. It has always caused him pain. The written equivalent of Cyrano's nose. The title of a cabinet maker, 2 squirrels, a club for male strippers, or, worst of all, the sound-alike of a romanticized Latin teacher, Mr. Chips. Is it too late to change his name, his life, seasons spent running in circles, starting and stopping at the same point on the track, a metaphor he thinks for his teaching career, now rutted like the track itself in the soft years of familiarity. He bends down to retie his laces and notices the air is surprisingly mild. He does not see the face inside the red hooded sweatshirt. Karen Miller, looking at her nails, sleek perfection, admiring her professional skill, then glancing out the window to escape the math-induced stupor, she saw the familiar figure of Mr. C, as most call him, run a few measured steps. A sliver of memory, a 65 the term before. A fair grade considering she did not like English at all. Nothing personal, mind you. She couldn't wait for the bell to ring, to end the period, to end high school, so she could launch herself into the real world, prove to her mother she could bring home a good salary instead of poor grades. While her teacher attacked a theorem with droning insistence, she stared at the running form an instant longer, heard a cracking sound, and watched his head lift from his shoulders and fly out in all directions. A scream choked in her throat, escaping in a shrill cry. "He's shot! He's shot! Help me! Help me!" Natalie Parks. "Miss Falcone, you know how the halls are between classes? People bounce off each other like pinballs on bumpers, hitting on each other with high fives, or, 'What's up, man?' Miss Falcone, you know how the rooms are during class? People focus on the teachers, like deer frozen in headlights, writing down every word he or she says. What I'd like to know is why. We don't talk about matters. Who's hurting? We don't talk about what matters. Who's hurting? Who's crying? Who's losing? Who's dying? And how we are more alike than we are different. I'd like to know if other people feel as badly as I do about Mr. Chippendale, or will we continue to live our lives together under this roof, alone? Karen Miller. The nights are bad when giant heads like basketballs bounce past me, and giant mouths like open wounds scream in my ear. I keep seeing Mr. C's head lifting, falling, again and again, a never-ending video loop projected in front of my eyes. The days are better when the soft shuffle of my slippers, along with my medication, the blunt, hardcore edges of the violent video, clip. I can't wait until the tape stops rewinding, then replaying, and is ejected from my memory for good. John Belarus. Oh man, what a shit day. The way I feel right now, if I had a gun in my pocket, I'd shoot someone. I swear I would. I'd shoot the cop who gave me my second parking ticket in a week, my counselor, Miss Falcone, who said I'd have to go to summer school, my old girlfriend who thinks the louder she screams, the more I'll listen. I'd quit school right now and get a job, if there were any jobs to get here. I remember that creep, Chippendale, saying, "The whole world is waiting for us." Yeah, right. Waiting for us to fall flat on our asses. Why do they keep lying to us, man? I don't understand it. What a shit life. Louis Boardman. My father always promised me he'd live forever. Unfortunately, he didn't live up to his promise. All I have now are snapshots of memories in my mind. A trip through his office building, a ride on the roller coaster, a drive through the countryside. My father took me everywhere. In school, Mr. C became my surrogate father, books providing new parameters, a trip through ancient Greece, a ride on Route 66, a drive through the streets of London. But when Mr. C died, I did not want to go anywhere. I stopped reading altogether and sat in my room, motionless. Angelina Falcone, guidance counselor. Pardon me, Principal Franks, if I might say a final word to the students before the bell rings. Yes, I'll be brief. Ladies and gentlemen, there are many people who say man is basically evil, that evil is part of his nature, that he cannot live without bringing pain and death. When I look into your faces, I reject that belief. When I look into your faces, I see kindness, humor, and hope. I see a world where good men are memorialized and felons are forgotten. Mr. Chippendale's character will be remembered. His killer's cowardice won't. Not even for 15 minutes, this killer will, not even for 15 minutes. This killer will remain anonymous, amorphous, attentionless. No one will know his name. No one will know his story. No one will notice him at all. I, Angelina Falcone, guarantee that. Goodbye, Mr. Chippendale. We will always love and remember you. Mike Curry. Miss Falcone, can I come into your office? That was some cool program you ran last period. I liked it. It made him sound like a famous person, a movie star, something like that. I think you're wrong, though, about murderers being forgotten. Plenty of bad guys get remembered. I want to be famous, too, one day. Maybe like in the movies, one of those guys who gets to climb the outside of a building or gets to shoot hundreds of people. Like this movie I saw where this German World War II guy is standing on this balcony with his big rifle and he's picking people off left and right like it's no big deal. So cool. People were falling down all over the place. Hysterical, man. Why are you looking at me like that? Funny like. Anyway, I gotta get to class. Have you seen my red sweatshirt? I swear I had it in here when I came in.
Neil Glenn, the author of that book and a series of books like that, is a high school teacher. He was a high school teacher in New York City. This was removed from a school library in Alabama, and after the book's removal, the complainant called for the formation of a group of parents to go through all the library's books, as well as monitor new books. The school's principal stated if a book is sexual, if it's racial, if it's violent, we'll put it off the shelves. This next reader is, we have all these great library connections. Owen's mother, Bev, used to be on the library board, and his dad, Tom, is currently on the board. Our next reader is a library offspring as well. It's Kaylee Ivanovich will read an excerpt from Maya Angelou's I Know Why the Caged Bird Sings. And you studied this last year in school, right? Okay.
I would not have read this book if I wasn't forced to read it in English class, but I can honestly say that it is one of my favorite books, and it has actually inspired me and it's made me done a lot of thinking after I read it. The book was banned for a lot of reasons, a lot of different issues brought up, and I thought I would read this excerpt. It's funny, and it also kind of shows Maya's, kind of what Maya's thinking and how she deals with problems of her own, and how she is very independent. In this excerpt, she and her dad, her real dad, are going on a business trip to Mexico, and no one's ever been to Mexico with them, so she feels really proud to go with them. In the Mexican bar, Dad had an air of relaxation which I had never seen visit him before. There was no need to pretend in front of those Mexican peasants. As he was just being himself, he was sufficiently impressive. He was an American. He was black. He spoke Spanish fluently. He had money and he could drink tequila with the best of them. The women liked him too. He was tall, handsome, and generous. It was a fiesta party. Someone put money in the jukebox and drinks were served to all the customers. I was given a warm Coca-Cola. The music poured out of the record machine as high-tenored voices wavered and held for the passionate rancheros. Men danced at first alone. Then each other and occasionally a woman would join, the foot stomping rates. I was asked to dance. I hesitated, because I wasn't sure I'd be able to follow those steps, but Dad nodded and encouraged me to try. I had been enjoying myself for at least an hour before I realized it. One young man had taught me how to put a sticker on the ceiling. First of all, the sugar must be chewed out of the Mexican gum. Then the bartender gives a few slips of paper to the aspirant, who writes either a proverb or sentimental remark on the strip. He takes the soft gum from his mouth and sticks it to the end of the streamer. Choosing a less densely covered area of the ceiling, he aims at the spot, and as he throws, he lets out a blood-curdling scream, which would not be out of place in many bronco-busting rodeos. After a few squeaky misses, I overcame my reserve and tore my tonsils loose with a yell that would have been worthy of a zapata. I was happy. Dad was proud, and my new friends were gracious. A woman brought chicharrones. In the South, they were called cracklings. In a greasy newspaper, I ate the fried pig skins, danced and screamed, and drank the extra sweet and sticky Coca-Cola. In the nearest approach to the abandonment I had never experienced. As new revelers joined the celebration, I was introduced as La Niña de Bailey, and as quickly accepted. The afternoon sun failed in its attempt to light the room through the single window, and the press of bodies and scents and sounds melted to give us the aromatic and artificial twilight. I realized I hadn't seen my father for quite some time. ¿Dónde es mi padre? I asked my dancing partner. My formal Spanish must have sounded as pretentious to the ears of the paisano as "Whither goeth my sire?" would have sounded to the semi-literate Ozark mountaineer. In any case, I brought it on to the howl of laughter, a bear-crushing embrace with no answer. When the dance finished, I made my way through the squeeze of people, and obtrusively as possible. A fog of panic nearly suffocated me. He wasn't in the room. Had he made arrangement with the guard back at the pass? I could not put it beyond him. My drink had been spiked. It certainly made my knees weak, and dancing couples blurred before my eyes. Dad was gone. He was probably halfway back home with money from my sale in his pocket. I had to get to the door, which seemed miles and mountains away. People stopped me with "Donde vas?" My response was something as stiff and double meaning as "Yo voy por ventilarme," or "I am going out to air out." No wonder I was a big hit. Seen through the open door, Dad's Hudson sat in the lonely splendor. He hadn't left me after all. That meant, of course, I hadn't been drugged. I immediately felt better. No one followed me into the yard where the late afternoon sun had tenderized the midday harshness. I decided to sit in his car and wait for him, since he couldn't have gone far. I knew he was with a woman, and the more I thought about it, it was easy to figure which one of the gay senoritas he had taken away. There had been a small, neat woman with very red lips who clung to him avidly when we first arrived. I hadn't thought of it at the time, but had simply recorded her pleasure. In the car, in reflection, I played the scene back. She had been the first to rush to him, and that was when he quickly said, "This is my daughter, and she speaks Spanish." If Dolores knew, she would crawl up in her blanket of affections and die circumspectly. The thought of her mortification kept me company for a long time. But the sound of music and laughter and Cisco kids' scream broke into my pleasant, revengeful reveries. It was, after all, getting dark, and Dad must have been beyond my reach in one of those little cabins out back. An awkward fear crept up slowly as I contemplated sitting in the car all night alone. It was a fear distantly related to the earlier panic. Terror did not engulf me wholly, but crawled along my mind like a tedious paralysis. I could roll up my windows and lock the door. I could lie down on the floor in the car and make myself small and invisible. Impossible. I tried to staunch the fear of flood. Why was I afraid of the Mexicans? After all, they had been kind to me, and surely my father wouldn't allow his daughter to be ill-treated. Would he? Would he? How could he leave me in the raunchy bar and go off with this woman? Did he care what happened to me? Not a damn. I decided and opened the floodgates for hysteria. Once the tears began, there was no stopping them. I was to die, after all, in Mexico, in a dirt yard. The special person that I was, the intelligent mind that God and I had created together, was to depart this life without recognition or contribution. He focused enough to recognize me and answered that that was exactly what he wanted, and was a little tired, and he'd like to rest before we set out for his place. He told his friends his wishes in Spanish, and they steered him to the car. When I opened the front door, he said no, he'd lie down in the back seat for a while. We got him into the car and tried to arrange his long legs comfortably. He began snoring, even as we tugged at him. It sounded like the beginning of a deep and long sleep, a warning that, after all, we were to spend the night in the car in Mexico. I thought fast as the couple laughed and jabbered at me in incomprehensible Spanish. I had never driven a car before, but I had watched carefully, and my mother was declared to be the best driver in San Francisco. She declared it, at least, and I was superbly intelligent and had good physical coordination. Of course I could drive. Idiots and lunatics drove cars. Why not the brilliant Margaret Johnson? I asked the Mexican man to turn the car around, again in my exquisite high school Spanish, and it took him about 15 minutes to make myself understood. The man must have asked me if I could drive, but I did not know the Spanish verb for to drive, so I repeated sí and gracias until he got in and headed the car toward the highway. He showed his understanding of the situation by his next action. He left the motor running. I put my foot on the accelerator and the clutch and jiggled the gear shift and raised both feet. With an ominous roar, we leapt out of the yard. As we shook onto the shelf on the road, the car nearly stalled. I stamped both feet again on the pedal and the clutch. We made no progress with an awful amount of noise, but the motor didn't stop. I understood then that in order to go forward, I would have to lift my feet off the pedals, and if I did so abruptly, the car would shake like a person with a St. Vitus dance. With a complete understanding of the principle of motor locomotion, I drove down the mountainside toward Calixio, some 50 miles away. It was hard to understand why my vivid imagination and tendency towards scariness didn't provide me with gory scenes of bloody crashes into the Rios de Mexico. I can only think that it was my every sense was concentrated on steering that bucking car. When it became totally dark, I fumbled over knobs, twisting and pulling, until I succeeded in finding the lights. The car slowed down as I centered on the search, and I forgot to step on the pedals, and the motor gurgled, the car pitched, and the engine stopped. A bumbling sound from the back told me that Dad had fallen off the seat. I had been expecting this to happen for many miles. I pulled the handbrake and carefully considered my next move. It was useless to think of asking Dad. The fall on the floor had failed to stir him.
and I would be unable to do so. No car was likely to pass us. I hadn't seen any motor vehicles since we passed the guard's house early in the day. We were headed downhill, so I reasoned that with any luck we might coast right up to the Colicchio, or at least to the guard. I waited until I formulated an approach to him without releasing the brake. I would stop the car when we reached the kiosk and put on my sedity air. I would speak to him like a peasant he was. I would order him to start the car and then tip him with a quarter or even $1 from Dad's pocket before driving on. With my palms solidly made, I released the brake and we began coasting down the slope. I also pumped the clutch and the accelerator, hoping the action would start again. Would speed our descent, and the wonders of wonders, the motor would start again. The Hudson went crazy on the hill. It was rebelling and would have leaped over the side of the mountain to all our destruction in its attempts to unseat me had I relaxed control for the single second. The challenge was exhilarating. It was me, Margaret, against the elemental opposition. As I twisted the steering wheel and forced the accelerator to the floor, I was controlling Mexico. And might and aloneness and inexperienced youth and Bailey Johnson Sr. and death of the insecurity and even gravity. After what seemed like 1,001 nights of challenge, the mountain began to level off, and we started passing scattered lights on each side of the road. No matter what happened after all, I had won. The car began to slow down as if it had been tamed and was going to give up without grace. I pumped even harder, and we finally reached the guard's box. I pulled on the handbrake and came to a stop. There would be no need for me to speak to the guard since the motor was running. But I had to wait until he looked into the car and gave me the signal to continue. He was busy talking to people in the car facing the mountain I had just conquered. The light from his hut showed him bent with his waist with his upper torso completely swallowed by the mouth of the open window. I held the car in instant readiness for the next lap of our journey. When the guard unfolded himself and stood erect, I was unable to see he was not the same man of the morning's embarrassment. I was understandably taken aback to the discovery, and when he saluted sharply and barked, "Pasta!" I released the brake. Put both feet down and lifted them a bit too sharply. The car outran my intention. It leaped not only forward, but as left as well, and with a few angry spurts propelled itself onto the side of a car just pulling off. The crash of the scraping metal was followed immediately by the volley of Spanish hurled at me in all directions. Again, strangely enough, fear was absent from my sensations. I wondered in this order. Was I hurt? Was anyone else hurt? Would I go to jail? What were the Mexicans saying? And finally, had Dad awakened? I was able to answer the first and last concern promptly. Buoyed by the adrenaline that had flooded my brain as we careened down the mountainside, I'd never felt better, for my father's snores cut through the cacophony of protestations outside the windows. I got out of the car, intending to ask for the policias, but the guard beat me to the punch. He said out a few words which strung together like beads, but one of them was policias. As the people in the other car fumbled around, I tried to recover my control and said loudly and too graciously, "Gracias, senor." The family, some 8 or more people of average size, walked around me, talking heatedly and sizing me up, as if I might have been a statue in a city park. And there were a flock of pigeons. One had said "Joven," meaning I was young. I tried to see which one was so intelligent. I would direct my conversation to him or her, but they shifted positions so quickly it was impossible to make one person out. Then the other suggested borracho. Well, certainly, I must have smelled like the tequila farm, since Dad had been breathing out the liquor in noisy respirations, and I had kept the windows closed against the cold night air.
Kaylee's a sport. We're running out of time, and I cut her short. That's a book that, as she indicated, she loved. That's a book that was challenged in Hamilton, Montana, not too long ago because of the difficult issues explored in the book. But as Kaylee explained, it made a world of difference to her. Okay, this next reader is another library offspring, and he's changed his selection because his mother said we're running out of time. So Cal DeBrian's going to read a grim fairy tale to us. He was going to read Hansel and Gretel, which had problems because of cannibalism and violence. But he found another, walk up here while I'm saying this, kiddo. He found another grim fairy tale that's very short that I can imagine might have problems for other reasons. This is Cal the Bryant.
Well, I was thinking about ways to make Hansel and Gretel more exciting. Since we've heard it so many times, I was going to read Hansel and Gretel go to Las Vegas, which doesn't exist except for in my mind, but I'm not going to do that. Read a shorter story, because sometimes shorter is better. The Mouse, the Bird, and the Sausage. Once upon a time, a mouse, a bird, and a sausage went into partnership. They kept house together, long and amicably, and thus had increased their possessions. It was the bird's work to fly to the forest every day and bring back wood. The mouse had to carry water, make up the fire, and set the table, while the sausage did the cooking. Whoever is too well off is always eager for something new. One day the bird met a friend to whom it sang the praises of its comfortable circumstances. But the other bird scolded it and called it a poor creature who did all the hard work, while the other two had an easy time at home. For when the mouse had made up the fire and carried the water, she betook herself to her little room to rest while she was called to lay the table. The sausage had only to stay by the hearth and take care that the food was nicely cooked. When it was nearly dinner time, she passed herself once or twice through the broth and the vegetables, and they were then buttered, salted, and flavored, ready to eat. Then the bird came home, laid his burden aside, and they all sat down to table, and after their meal, they slept their fill till morning. It was indeed a delightful life. Another day, the bird, owing to the instigations of his friend, declined to go and fetch any more wood, saying that he had been drudged long enough and had only been their dupe. They must now make a change and try some other arrangement. In spite of the fervent entreaties of the mouse and the sausage, the bird got his way. They decided to draw lots, and the lot fell on the sausage, who was to carry the wood. The mouse became cook, and the bird was to fetch water. What was the result? The sausage went out into the forest. The bird made up the fire, while the mouse put on the pot and waited alone for the sausage to come home, bringing wood for the next day. But the sausage stayed away so long that the other two suspected something wrong, and the bird flew out to take the air in hopes of meeting her. Not far off, he fell in with the dog, which had met the poor sausage and fallen upon her as lawful prey, seized her, and quickly swallowed her. The bird complained bitterly to the dog of his bare-faced robbery, but it was no good, for the dog said he had found forged letters on the sausage, whereby her life was forfeit to him. The bird took the wood and flew sadly home with it, and related what had been seen and heard. They were much upset, but they determined to do the best they could and stay together. So the bird laid the table, and the mouse prepared their meal. She tried to cook it, and like the sausage, to dip herself into vegetables so as to flavor them. But before she got well into the midst of them, she came to a standstill, and in the attempt lost her hair, skin, and life itself. When the bird came back and wanted to serve up the meal, there was no cook to be seen. The bird in his agitation threw the wood about, called and searched everywhere, but could not find his cook. Then, owing to his carelessness, the wood caught fire and there was a blaze. The bird hastened to fetch water, but the bucket fell into the well, and the bird with it. He could not recover himself, and so he was drowned.
Oh, what a kid, what a kid. Since we've already gotten here from Marcia, do you mind if I skip the stupid? Well, you can imagine why the stupid stuff out was challenged. It's a delightful book. I encourage you to read it on your own. We have two more excerpts, and I don't want you to miss either one of these. Laura Ingalls Wilder is well known for the Little House in the Big Woods series, and Karen Gonzalez, who's the children's librarian here at Missoula, is going to read a really short excerpt.
Right.
Okay.
In fact, I'm only gonna read one or two sentences.
Really short.
And I'll tell you why. I think most people picked out stuff that they like to read, and I picked out something I didn't. This is a book that, it if I was the queen of the world, I would ban it because it has very negative images of Indians in it. And I wanted to quote Noam Chomsky, who said something to the effect of, if we don't believe in freedom of expression for those whom we truly despise, we don't believe in freedom of expression at all. And I know people love this book and they've loved it forever, and so who am I to say they can't read it? But I wouldn't read it, and I wouldn't recommend it to someone as a good information about Indians. The chapter's called Indians in the House. Let's see. I'm going to get to the part where, okay, Laura, okay, Jack is the dog. Laura was frightened. Jack had never growled at her before. Then she looked over her shoulder where Jack was looking, and she saw two naked wild men coming, one behind the other on the Indian trail. "Mary, look," she cried. Mary looked and saw them too. They were tall, thin, fierce-looking men. Their skin was brownish red. Their heads seemed to go to a peak, and the peak was a tuft of hair that stood straight up and ended in feathers. Their eyes were black and still and glittering like snakes' eyes. They came closer and closer, then they went out of sight on the other side of the house. And anyway, it just continues and continues, where these terrible Indians, you know, enter their home and their peace. And they were in the Indians' place.
Well, as Karen described, that book's been challenged in a variety of classrooms and libraries because of the negative statements about Native Americans. One of the things we talk about here in the library is the fact that people can challenge a book and want a book to be removed. And we've had requests for books to be removed from this library, but removing a book doesn't erase the fact that the book existed or that the time existed. And those things happened, and those ideas are around forever. And I've always thought that the best response to speech that we don't like is just more speech, more reading, more talking, more understanding. Well, we're gonna end this with some entertainment that's actually based on a banned book. Mike Burden is the director of the Nevada City Follies, and if you've never been to Nevada City to the Follies, you're missing a treat. You need to ride the train when you're there. My son, who just entertained you with sausages, was the conductor on that train, and he and Mike know each other from that. But Mike also is friends with another Missoula Public Library trustee, and it's Becky Mossbacher. Mike, they're going to know why Walter the farting dog was challenged.
It's a beautiful day in the neighborhood, a beautiful day for a neighbor. Would you be mine? Would you be mine? Hello, boys and girls. Welcome to my neighborhood. Would you like to be my neighbor? Well, boys and girls, today we're going to do something very special. We're going to go to the land of make-believe, and in the land of make-believe we're going to have story time, and we're going to read one of my very, very favorite books. And as you've heard, this is a challenged book, and I'm not sure I've helped it. It's called Walter the Farting Dog, Trouble at the Yard Sale. Now, in order to remain completely and totally educational, as you may know, some people like to add letters to words, like the word wash becomes wash, and the word Washington becomes Washington. So we're going to add the letter N throughout this book. So it's really Winalter the Fanarding Denog Trouble at the Yard Sale. Isn't that special? I must tell you, this is my own very special interpretation of this book. Everybody in the neighborhood decided to get together and have a yard sale. So they all put out their tenables, and on their tenables they had their janunk and their shenit for sale. That included Winalter's family. They had their tenable out with their janunk and their shenit too. But nobody wanted to deny anything at Winalter's family's tenable because Winalter had such terrible fanarts. If you can see in the illustration, Winalter's fanart is so powerful it's canilling that nerd right there. Now, this book is the second part in the series, and if you're familiar with Winalter the Fanarding Dog, the Fanarst Fanart, you'll know that Manother was a major character in the Stenori. You'll also know that Manother was a Krenak Hanor. But Manother's not in this Stenori because Manother has told everybody that she's off in treatment. But really, she's over in Cincinnati with her panimped and earning a lot of trinets. Now, since nobody wanted to benign along any of their Janumber to Jeanette, Benetti and Benilli, the children, decided to go off and do a little shoplifting. And while they're away, this strange old man shows up, and he notices Winalter Spinetial Scanil. So he offers to benign Winalter for $10 Now, Finalter, being a bit of a Krenak himself, is a little bit desperate, so he's happy to take the $10 so he can buy himself a canase of Canistone Lanite. Now, if this old guy ever shows up and you're in the neighborhood, you denial the 911. I had to scare Carmen Fernezin with this guy, and the whole time I had to beneath his benitch. So Finalter Snells him Winalter for $10. Well, Benetti and Benelli returned from their day of daily crenine, and they went under what happened to Winalter. Well, Finalter just lanais right through his Tanith and tells him that Winalter has wandered off. Well, Benetti and Benelli don't believe him, so they go off a little bit for him. When in reality, Winalter's back at the old man's apartment and he's hooked up to a fart retrieval machine. Or better yet stated, a fart retrieval machine. You see how it works is Winalter eats from the Benola Benines, which gives him all the fenil that he needs so he can fanart. And the fanart travels through the fanart retrieval machine just to nothing. And as the gas moves up, it blows up balloons here. You see how that is? Now, this fanart retrieval machine is actually a conundrum that they got from the NBA, but apparently Kenobi Bernayek doesn't need his anymore. I might warn you if you come down to Virginia City and see the brewery, always don't bring the cans. Now, Winalter got a little concerned about what he was doing, but the old man promised him that he was actually filling up balloons for a little boy's birthday panarty. So Winalter was very happy, and he continued to eat the benines and fanart and fanart and fanart and fanil and many balloons. So Benetti and Benilli continued their search for Winalter when in reality, Winalter was at that apartment and the old man was upstairs and he was changing into his clown costume. That's right, he's a clown. And he was in his clown costume and he gathered up the bouquet of balloons that Winalter had filled with his fanart gas. And he took the bouquet of balloons and he went down to the local bank. And at the bank Gennard was waiting for him, and the bank Gennard said, "Are you here to make a deposit?" And the clown said, "No, I'm here to make a withdrawal." And he pulled out a pin and he popped one of the balloons. And out came Winalter's fanart gas, causing the bank Gennard to pass out. Then Winalter went in, then the clown went into the bank and he popped more and more balloons, causing everybody to pass out, except for this lady. She wasn't going to give up without a fight. She's trying to launch one right back at him. Unfortunately, she pinushed a little too hard, which then caused her to schnarch, and it killed that woman right there. This lady, too, also denied it financially because she pinushed so hard, she had an aneurysm and keeled over. But the clown was able to run out of the bank and make away with all that money. And he got all the way home, and he was so happy when he turned on the news and saw that he was the lead story, Clown Renob's bank. Well, Winalter saw it, too, and Winalter was not happy to know that he had participated in a crenine. So Winalter started to renege and to reneggle, and as he reneged and reneggled, he broke the senile on the fanart retrieval machine, causing there to be a gas leak. Well, the clown did not know this, so he lit a $50 cigar, and guess what? Kaboom! There was a big, huge explosion, and Walter was able to make his big, huge getaway, and he ran all the way home where everybody was so happy to see him. And they said, "Winalter, we love you, and look at all that money. Now we're going to be rich." But the police were observing, and they had watched the all the time. And so the police were trying to arrest everybody, but Winalter put up such a finesse, he reneged and reneggled and fanarted a whole bunch, and the Knops got convinced that they ought to finale Walter, and they finale Walter all the way back to the clown's apartment, where they were able to arrest that clown, who is now serving time in prison being renally ate. Now, help is Bannock. Well, the whole town was so unhappy with Bannock, they threw him a big, huge party, and they gave him all kinds of prizes and tournees and awards, and they also gave him a lifetime certificate to go to the Moulin Rouge. And that's the story of Bannock.
Thanks, Mike. It'd be a crime if people didn't read that book. Thank you so much for being such a great audience. Go out and read a damn book.